When a broke single dad defended a stranger in a coffee shop, he had no idea she was a billionaire CEO about to change his life forever. But when her secret was exposed, their fragile connection shattered in an instant. Could love survive the weight of wealth and deception? This is the story of Caleb and Victoria, two souls from opposite worlds who found each other in the most unexpected way. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday morning, hammering against the windows of the Cedar Street Café with the kind of relentless rhythm that made Seattle feel like it was washing itself clean. Inside, the warmth was thick with the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls, the kind of comfort that made people linger longer than they should on their way to work. Caleb Hayes sat in his usual corner booth, shoulders hunched over a cooling cup of black coffee, watching the world through rain-streaked glass. At 32, he looked older than his years, not in a way that showed on his face, but in the quiet heaviness of his eyes, the way his mouth rarely lifted into a smile anymore. His flannel shirt was worn at the elbows, his jeans faded from too many washes, and his work boots carried the scuff marks of a man who couldn't afford to replace them. He checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 7:45. Emma's school started at 8:30, which meant he had exactly 12 minutes before he needed to be out the door and back in the cold. His daughter was 8 years old now, with her mother's dark curls and a smile that could break through the grayest Seattle morning. She was the only reason Caleb got out of bed anymore. 3 years. It had been 3 years since Sarah died, and sometimes it still felt like yesterday. The drunk driver who'd run the red light on Madison Street hadn't survived either, which somehow made it worse. There was no one to be angry at, no one to blame except the universe itself. So Caleb had learned to swallow that anger, pack it down deep, and focus on the one thing that mattered, being there for Emma. The cafe was beginning to fill with the morning rush. Lawyers in expensive suits grabbing lattes before heading to their downtown offices, college students with laptops and oversized headphones, construction workers like himself looking for a quick caffeine hit before the day's labor began. Caleb barely noticed them anymore. This cafe had become his ritual, his anchor. Every morning, the same booth, the same coffee, the same 12 minutes of peace before the chaos of single parenthood and manual labor consumed his day. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his bank account balance with a familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. $1,247. Rent was due in 6 days. That would leave him with about $300 to cover groceries, Emma's school supplies, gas, and everything else until his next paycheck. He was always 2 or 3 unexpected expenses away from disaster, always running the numbers in his head, always calculating what he could cut, what he could postpone, what he could sacrifice. But Emma never went without. That was his one unbreakable rule. She might not have the fancy toys or the newest clothes, but she had food, shelter, love, and the kind of stability that Caleb himself had never known as a kid. He'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes that never quite felt like his own, always the outsider, always temporary. He'd sworn that his daughter would never feel that kind of rootlessness, that uncertainty. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and a gust of cold air swept through the space. Caleb glanced up reflexively, then back down at his phone. He didn't care who came or went. He wasn't here to make friends or small talk. He was here for the coffee and the quiet, nothing more. But something made him look up again. A woman had entered, mid-30s maybe, with light brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a gray wool coat that looked expensive but understated, and there was something about the way she moved, careful, measured, like someone who was used to being watched. She ordered quickly at the counter, her voice too soft for Caleb to hear, then turned to scan the cafe for a seat. That's when he noticed the man. He'd come in right behind her, maybe 40 years old, thick-necked and aggressive in the way he carried himself. His hand was already reaching for her arm before she'd even taken 2 steps from the counter. The woman jerked away, but the man followed, his voice rising above the ambient noise of the cafe. "Don't walk away from me, Victoria. We're not done talking." "We are done," the woman, Victoria, replied, her voice tight with controlled fear. "I told you that yesterday. I don't want to see you again." "You think you can just cut me off? After everything?" The man's face was flushing red now, his jaw clenched. Several people in the cafe were starting to turn and watch, but no one moved. No one intervened. Caleb felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't his business. He didn't know these people. He had 12 minutes before he needed to pick up Emma, and getting involved in someone else's drama was the last thing he needed. He should just finish his coffee, pay his bill, and walk out the door. But Victoria's eyes found his across the cafe, just for a second. And in that second, Caleb saw something he recognized all too well. The look of someone who was alone, who didn't know if anyone would help, who was preparing for the worst because experience had taught her that people usually looked away. He'd seen that look in the mirror often enough when he was a kid, passed from one foster home to another, invisible to a world that didn't care. "She asked you to leave her alone," Caleb heard himself saying, his voice calm but carrying across the space. The man's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. "This is none of your business, friend." "I'm not your friend," Caleb replied evenly, setting down his coffee and standing up slowly. He wasn't a big man, 5'11", maybe 190 with his work clothes on, but he'd spent years on construction sites, and his frame carried the kind of lean strength that came from physical labor. More importantly, he'd grown up fighting. Not because he wanted to, but because foster care had a way of teaching you that sometimes you had to stand your ground or get crushed. "And I'm making it my business. The lady said she doesn't want to talk to you, so maybe you should respect that and walk away." The cafe had gone quiet now, all eyes on the unfolding confrontation. The man took a step toward Caleb, his hands balling into fists. "You want to make something of this?" Caleb didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't show any of the adrenaline that was starting to pump through his veins. He'd learned a long time ago that most bullies backed down when someone stood up to them. Not all of them, but most. "I don't want to make anything of it. I just want you to leave her alone and walk out that door. That's all." For a long moment, the man stared at Caleb, weighing his options. Caleb could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Was this worth it? Was this worth a fight in front of witnesses? Finally, the man spat a curse under his breath, turned on his heel, and stormed toward the exit. "This isn't over, Victoria," he threw over his shoulder. "You can't hide forever." The door slammed behind him, and the bell's cheerful chime felt absurdly out of place in the tense silence that followed. Slowly, the other patrons turned back to their coffees and conversations, the moment already fading into background noise. Victoria stood frozen by the counter, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her untouched coffee. Caleb walked over slowly, keeping his distance, not wanting to add to her stress. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her eyes told a different story. Thank you. Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did." Caleb glanced at his watch. 7:52. He was going to be cutting it close. "Is he going to be a problem? Should you call someone?" "No, Victoria took a shaky breath, composing herself with visible effort. "I'll be fine. He's just my ex. He doesn't handle rejection well." Caleb nodded. He'd seen enough domestic situations in his life to know how complicated they could get. "If you need to call the police—" "I won't," she interrupted, then softened. "But thank you. Really. Most people would have just looked away." "Most people do," Caleb said, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him more closely. A weight of experience, of understanding what it felt like to be the one who needed help and didn't get it. They stood there for a moment in awkward silence, neither quite sure what to say next. Finally, Caleb checked his watch again. "I have to go. I need to pick up my daughter from my neighbor's place before school, but be careful, okay? Guys like that don't usually just give up." "I will," Victoria promised. "And thank you again, Mr. Caleb." Just Caleb. He didn't offer his last name, and she didn't push. He grabbed his jacket from the booth, left a $5 bill on the table, more than the coffee cost, but Karen, the waitress, had a kid too, and he knew she relied on tips, and headed for the door. "Caleb," Victoria called after him. He turned back. "Maybe I'll see you around?" He shrugged, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "It's a small neighborhood, probably." Then he was gone, disappearing into the rain, leaving Victoria standing alone in the cafe with her cooling coffee and a strange, unfamiliar feeling in her chest, something that might have been hope or curiosity or the first crack in walls she'd spent years building. Caleb made it to Mrs. Chen's apartment with 2 minutes to spare. The elderly woman lived 3 floors down from him in the same rundown building on Capitol Hill, and she'd been watching Emma in the mornings for the past year, ever since the previous sitter had moved to Portland. She charged him $50 a week, which was a steal, and she genuinely seemed to love Emma, which was priceless. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes, Mrs." Chen said as she opened the door, her wrinkled face breaking into a warm smile. Behind her, Emma sat at the small kitchen table, working on a drawing with fierce concentration. "Morning, Mrs. Chen. Thanks again for this." "No thanks needed. This one is easy." She gestured at Emma with affection. "Not like some of the wild children I've cared for over the years." "Daddy!" Emma looked up, her face lighting up. She scrambled down from the chair and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. She was getting so big now, already up to his chest. Soon she'd be too tall for this kind of hug, and the thought made his throat tight. "Hey, Pumpkin, ready for school?" "Can we stop for hot chocolate?" Emma asked hopefully, looking up at him with those devastating brown eyes that never failed to make him want to give her the world. Caleb winced internally. A hot chocolate at the cafe would be $4. $4 that he needed for other things. But it was a cold morning, and she was asking for so little. "Not today, Em, but I'll make you some at home after school, okay? With the marshmallows." Her face fell slightly, but she nodded, already learning the quiet lesson of financial reality that Caleb hated teaching her. "Okay, Daddy." They said goodbye to Mrs. Chen and headed down to the street where Caleb's 15-year-old Toyota pickup sat waiting. The truck was a rust bucket, temperamental and constantly threatening to break down, but it ran, and that was all that mattered. Emma climbed into the passenger seat. Technically, she should have been in the back, but the truck was a single cab, so they didn't have much choice, and buckled her seatbelt. As Caleb pulled into traffic, Emma chattered about her upcoming spelling test, about her friend Olivia's birthday party next week, about the book they were reading in class. Caleb listened, making the appropriate sounds of interest and encouragement, but part of his mind was still back in the cafe, replaying the confrontation. He didn't regret stepping in. Even now, running late and stressed about the day ahead, he knew he'd do it again. But there was something nagging at him, something about the woman, Victoria, that didn't quite add up. The way she'd carried herself, the quality of her coat, the careful way she'd thanked him, like she wasn't used to people helping without wanting something in return. Not his problem, he reminded himself. She'd been in trouble, he'd helped, it was over. He'd probably never see her again anyway. Seattle was big enough that two people could orbit each other for years without ever crossing paths twice. He dropped Emma off at Beacon Hill Elementary, watching until she'd safely made it through the front doors before pulling away. The construction site where he worked was another 20 minutes south, a new office complex going up in Renton. He was running late now, which meant his foreman, Big Mike, would give him grief about it. Sure enough, when Caleb pulled into the muddy parking lot at 8:45, Mike was already waiting, arms crossed over his barrel chest. "Hayes, nice of you to join us." "Sorry, Mike, the traffic was hell on I-5. "Traffic's always hell on I-5. That's why you leave earlier." Mike's gruff tone softened slightly as he looked at Caleb. They'd worked together for 3 years now, and Mike knew about Sarah, knew about Emma, knew that Caleb was doing his best. "Get your gear on. We're pouring concrete on the 3rd floor today, and we're already behind schedule." On it. The day was brutal. 10 straight hours of heavy lifting, hauling materials, and working in the November cold that seeped through even the thickest work gloves. By the time Caleb punched out at 7, his back was screaming and his hands were raw. He picked up Emma from after-school care, swung by the grocery store for a quick dinner run, mac and cheese, the cheap kind, with some frozen broccoli to pretend they were eating healthy, and made it home by 8. Their apartment was small, just a 1-bedroom that Caleb had divided with a curtain so Emma could have her own space. The building was old and poorly maintained, with radiators that clanked all night and neighbors who fought loud enough to hear through the thin walls. But it was home, and it was safe, and the rent was manageable as long as Caleb kept getting 40 hours a week. After dinner, after helping Emma with her homework, after reading her 2 chapters of Charlotte's Web and tucking her into bed, Caleb finally collapsed on the worn couch with a beer, one of the 6 he allowed himself per week, rationed carefully, and let the silence wash over him. His body ached. His mind was tired. And somewhere in the back of his thoughts, he kept seeing Victoria's face, the way she'd looked at him with surprise and gratitude, like kindness was something unexpected in her world. He fell asleep there on the couch, the beer unfinished on the coffee table, dreaming of nothing at all. The next morning, Caleb almost didn't go to the cafe. He was running later than usual. Emma had been difficult to wake up, grumpy and resistant, and by the time they'd worked through her morning routine, he was pressed for time. But the cafe was on the way, and he needed the coffee, needed those few minutes of normal before the chaos of the day consumed him. He pulled open the door at 7:53, 6 minutes later than his usual arrival time. The morning crowd was already thick, a line 4 deep at the counter. Caleb took his place in line, pulling out his wallet and counting bills, enough for a coffee barely, when someone tapped his shoulder. He turned to find Victoria standing behind him, looking somehow different in the morning light. She wore jeans today instead of the expensive coat, a simple blue sweater, and her hair was down around her shoulders. Without the fear and adrenaline of yesterday, he could see her more clearly. Light green eyes, a small scar above her left eyebrow, smile lines that suggested she'd laughed a lot at some point in her life, even if she wasn't laughing now. "Hey," she said, and there was something uncertain in her voice, like she wasn't sure of her welcome. "I was hoping I'd see you again." "Morning," Caleb replied, automatically polite but guarded. He didn't do well with strangers, with people getting close. 3 years of grief had taught him that the only truly safe relationship was the one he had with Emma. Everyone else could hurt you, could leave, could die. "I wanted to thank you properly," Victoria continued. "Yesterday, I was too shaken up to really express how much what you did meant to me. Can I buy you a coffee? It's the least I can do." Caleb's pride immediately bristled. He didn't need charity. "That's not necessary." "I know it's not necessary," she said gently, "but I'd like to. Please?" There was something in her eyes that reminded him of Emma when she was trying to convince him of something, a kind of earnest hope that was hard to refuse. And if he was being honest with himself, the $4 he'd save on coffee would mean he could stop for gas on the way home without worrying about his bank balance. "All right," he said finally. "Thanks." They ordered together, black coffee for him, some complicated latte for her, and found a small table by the window. Caleb kept checking his watch, calculating minutes, but Victoria seemed in no hurry. "So," she said, wrapping her hands around her cup, "do you make a habit of rescuing strangers?" "Do you make a habit of needing to be rescued?" Caleb shot back, then immediately regretted the harshness of it. But Victoria just laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise even her. "Fair point." She took a sip of her latte, considering him over the rim. "The truth is, I don't usually let people help me. I'm not very good at accepting help." "Neither am I," Caleb admitted. "But sometimes you don't have a choice." "Is that the voice of experience?" He shrugged. "Everyone needs help sometimes. The trick is finding people who'll actually give it without wanting something in return." There was a weight to those words, a history that Victoria seemed to sense. She didn't push, didn't pry, just nodded slowly. That's very true." They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe bustling around them. Caleb should have felt awkward, should have wanted to leave, but there was something comfortable about Victoria's presence. She didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter. She seemed content to just be. "I'm Victoria, by the way," she said finally, extending her hand across the table. "I realized yesterday I never actually introduced myself." "Caleb." He shook her hand briefly. Her grip was firm, confident. "And no offense, but I figured you'd want to forget about yesterday as fast as possible." "Why would you think that?" "Because most people want to forget the times they felt vulnerable, pride and all that." Victoria studied him with those green eyes, and Caleb had the uncomfortable feeling of being seen more clearly than he wanted to be. "You're not most people, are you?" "I'm nobody special," Caleb said flatly. "Just a guy trying to get through the day." "The guy who stands up when everyone else looks away?" Victoria's voice was soft but pointed. "That seems pretty special to me." Caleb felt heat rise in his face, not from embarrassment, but from discomfort with the praise. He didn't do what he'd done for recognition or gratitude. He'd done it because it needed doing, because he couldn't live with himself if he'd walked away. "Your ex," he said, deliberately changing the subject. "Is he going to be a problem?" Victoria's expression closed off slightly, walls going up. "I hope not. He's been persistent. We dated for a few months last year, and when I ended it, he didn't take it well. He keeps showing up places, calling, texting. I've asked him to stop, but she trailed off, staring into her cup. You should document everything, Caleb said. Texts, calls, times he shows up. If it escalates, you'll need evidence for a restraining order. You sound like you've dealt with this before. Not personally, but I grew up in the system, foster care. You see a lot of bad domestic situations when you're bouncing between homes. You learn the patterns. Victoria's face softened with something that might have been sympathy, but Caleb held up a hand before she could speak. Don't. I don't need the pity eyes. I'm fine. Turned out okay. I wasn't going to pity you, Victoria said quietly. I was going to say that it takes strength to survive something like that, to come out on the other side and still be willing to help people. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and drank his coffee. After a moment, Victoria asked, You mentioned yesterday you have a daughter? And just like that, Caleb's whole demeanor changed. The guardedness softened and something like warmth crept into his expression. Emma. She's 8. Smart as hell, too smart sometimes. She asked me yesterday if money grew on trees, why we couldn't just plant more. He smiled despite himself. Had to explain economics to a 3rd grader. What did you tell her? That money doesn't grow on trees, but if you work hard and save what you can build something. Maybe not a forest, but at least a garden. He paused, the smile fading. She deserves better than I can give her, deserves more. She has a father who clearly loves her, Victoria said. That counts for a lot more than you might think. Her mother would have been better at this, Caleb said, and he was surprised to hear himself saying it out loud. He never talked about Sarah, never opened up about the aching void her death had left. But something about Victoria's quiet attention made the words come easier. She was everything good, patient, kind, creative. She would have known how to raise a daughter the right way. I'm just stumbling through, hoping I don't screw her up too badly. How long has it been? 3 years. Drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly, they said. Like that's supposed to make it better, knowing she didn't suffer. Caleb's jaw tightened. Emma was 5. Too young to really understand, too old to forget. She still asks about her mom sometimes, and I never know what to say. The truth, probably, Victoria offered gently, that her mom loved her, that she's never really gone as long as Emma remembers her. Yeah. Caleb finished his coffee, the cup suddenly feeling heavy in his hands. I should go. I'm going to be late for work. Of course. Victoria stood as he did. Thank you for the conversation, Caleb, and for yesterday. It meant more than you know. He nodded, uncomfortable again with the gratitude, and headed for the door. But as he reached it, he turned back. Victoria was still standing by the table, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Be careful, he said. With your ex. Guys like that, they don't usually just give up. I will, she promised. And Caleb, maybe I'll see you tomorrow? He shrugged, but there was the ghost of a smile on his lips. Maybe. Then he was gone, disappearing into the gray Seattle morning, leaving Victoria alone with her thoughts and a strange, warm feeling in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something real in a world that had felt increasingly artificial and empty. She didn't know that Caleb Hayes was about to change her life. She didn't know that her carefully constructed walls were about to come crashing down. She didn't know that the simple act of sitting in a coffee shop and talking honestly would be the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. All she knew was that for the first time in a very long time, she was looking forward to tomorrow. And in his truck, racing toward the construction site with the radio playing softly, Caleb Hayes was thinking the exact same thing, even if he wouldn't have admitted it to himself, even if he was already trying to tamp down the dangerous flicker of hope that Victoria's attention had sparked. Some stories begin with grand gestures and dramatic moments, but the best ones, the ones that matter, often start with something smaller. A cup of coffee, an honest conversation, and 2 lonely people finding an unexpected connection in the unlikeliest of places. This was one of those stories, and it was just beginning. The next morning, Caleb told himself he wasn't going to the cafe because of Victoria. He was going because it was his routine, because he needed the coffee, because those 12 minutes of quiet had become essential to his sanity. The fact that he'd thought about her green eyes 3 times the night before meant nothing. The fact that he'd actually ironed his flannel shirt that morning, something he hadn't done in months, was pure coincidence. He pushed through this door at 7:43, earlier than usual, and felt a ridiculous flutter of disappointment when he didn't immediately spot her. The cafe was quiet, just a handful of early risers scattered among the tables. Karen, the waitress, gave him a knowing smile as he approached the counter. "Your usual, Caleb?" "Yeah, thanks." "She's not here yet," Karen said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "But she was asking about you yesterday afternoon. Wanted to know if you came in every morning." Caleb felt heat creep up his neck. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," Karen laughed, pouring his coffee. "For what it's worth, she seems nice, and Lord knows you could use some nice in your life." Before Caleb could respond, the bell above the door chimed. He didn't turn around. He refused to be that obvious. But Karen's smile widened, which told him everything he needed to know. "Good morning, Victoria," Karen called out cheerfully. "Your usual?" "Please, Karen, and maybe one of those blueberry muffins, if you have any left." Caleb heard footsteps approaching, and then Victoria was sliding into the seat across from him without asking, setting her bag down with a soft thud. She looked different again today, hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a simple black sweater and jeans, no makeup that he could see. There was something almost deliberately casual about her appearance, like she was trying to blend in, to be invisible. "I didn't say you could sit here," Caleb said, "but there was no heat in it." "You didn't say I couldn't." Victoria smiled, and it transformed her face completely. "Besides, I bought you coffee yesterday. That gives me at least one free pass to invade your personal space. That's not how it works, isn't it?" She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "What are the rules, then? I'd hate to violate cafe etiquette." Despite himself, Caleb felt the corner of his mouth twitch. There are no rules, just personal boundaries, which I'm currently violating. Massively. Should I leave? They looked at each other across the table, and Caleb realized with some surprise that he didn't want her to leave. It had been so long since he'd had an adult conversation that didn't revolve around construction schedules or Emma's school activities. So long since someone had looked at him like he was interesting rather than just functional. "No," he said finally. "You can stay." "Well, that was gracious." Victoria's tone was dry, but her eyes were warm. "Your charm is overwhelming. I'm out of practice." "With charm or with people in general?" "Both." Karen arrived with Victoria's latte and muffin, giving Caleb another one of those knowing looks that made him want to crawl under the table. After she left, Victoria broke off a piece of the muffin and pushed the plate toward him. "Share with me?" "I'm fine." "Caleb, I watched you count dollar bills yesterday before ordering coffee. When's the last time you ate breakfast?" He bristled immediately, pride flaring hot in his chest. "I don't need— It's a muffin, not a marriage proposal," Victoria interrupted gently. "And I can't eat the whole thing anyway. So either you help me out or it goes to waste. Your choice." Caleb stared at her for a long moment, trying to figure out if she was pitying him or genuinely offering. Finally, he reached across and took a small piece of the muffin. It was still warm, the blueberries sweet and bursting with flavor. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had anything this good for breakfast. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome." Victoria took a sip of her latte, seemingly content to sit in silence. But after a moment she asked, "So what do you do, Caleb? For work, I mean." "Construction, commercial sites mostly. Right now I'm working on an office building in Renton." "Do you like it?" He shrugged. "It pays the bills, keeps a roof over Emma's head. That's all that matters." "But do you like it?" Victoria pressed. "Is it what you wanted to do with your life?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in years. Sarah used to ask him about his dreams, back when they were young and stupid and thought they had all the time in the world. But after she died, survival had become the only dream that mattered. "I wanted to be a teacher," he heard himself saying. "History. I was actually in school for it when Sarah got pregnant. We weren't planning on kids that early, but—" He trailed off, the memories flooding back. "Anyway, I dropped out to work full-time. Somebody had to have insurance, steady income. Then after Sarah died, going back to school wasn't exactly an option." "Why not?" Caleb gave her an incredulous look. "Because I have an 8-year-old daughter who needs me. Because I'm barely keeping my head above water as it is. because dreams are a luxury I can't afford. That's sad, Victoria said simply, and there was no pity in her voice, just honest observation. That's life, Caleb countered. You do what you have to do. Well, what if you could do both? Take care of Emma and pursue what you love. Then I'd be living in a fantasy world. He checked his watch. 7:54. 6 minutes before he needed to leave. What about you? What do you do? For just a second, something flickered across Victoria's face. Hesitation, maybe, or calculation. But it passed so quickly that Caleb almost thought he'd imagined it. I work in business, she said vaguely. Management, mostly. It's complicated. That tells me exactly nothing. Fair enough. Victoria smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Let's just say I spend a lot of time in meetings, making decisions that affect a lot of people. It's exhausting, if I'm being honest. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role, being who everyone expects me to be, and I've forgotten who I actually am underneath all of it. There was something raw in that admission, something that resonated with Caleb's own sense of being trapped in a life that wasn't quite what he'd imagined. Yeah, he said softly. I get that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Caleb's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. Emma says she forgot her library book. It's on the kitchen counter if you want to bring it by. I have to go, Caleb said, standing up reluctantly. Emma forgot something at home. Of course. Victoria stood as well. Same time tomorrow? Caleb hesitated. This was already becoming a pattern, a routine that included her. That felt dangerous, like opening a door he'd spent 3 years keeping locked. But as he looked at her face, hopeful, uncertain, trying so hard to seem casual when he could tell this mattered to her, he found himself nodding. Yeah, same time tomorrow. Her smile was radiant, completely unguarded, and it did something strange to his chest. He turned away quickly, grabbing his jacket and heading for the door, before he could do something stupid like ask for her phone number, or tell her she had a beautiful smile. Behind him, Victoria watched him go, her heart beating faster than it had any right to. She'd woken up that morning excited, actually excited, for the first time in months. The prospect of seeing Caleb again, of having a real conversation with someone who saw her as just Victoria, not as the billionaire CEO of Hale Industries, not as the woman whose face appeared in Forbes and Fortune, had made her feel like a kid on Christmas morning. She hadn't lied to him exactly, but she hadn't told him the truth either. And the longer this went on, the harder that truth would be to share. But not yet, she told herself. Just a little longer. Just let me have this one real thing before the world comes crashing back in. The pattern continued for a week. Every morning, Caleb would arrive at the cafe between 7:40 and 7:45, and Victoria would already be there, or she'd arrive moments later. They'd share the table by the window, trading pieces of conversation like treasured possessions. Victoria would buy muffins or scones and insist on sharing them. Caleb would protest, pride warring with hunger, and then accept because he was learning that Victoria wasn't offering out of pity. She genuinely seemed to enjoy his company. They talked about everything and nothing. Victoria asked about Emma constantly, seeming genuinely interested in the minutiae of 8-year-old life. Caleb found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone, about Emma's obsession with marine biology, about the time she'd tried to save a wounded bird and cried for days when it died, about her laugh that sounded so much like Sarah's it sometimes made his heart stop. In turn, Victoria shared carefully edited pieces of her own life. She talked about the pressure of her job, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted things from her, the way she sometimes felt like she was drowning in expectations. She never mentioned specifics, no company names, no details that might reveal who she really was. But the emotions were real, and Caleb could feel them. Do you have family? He asked one morning, after she'd mentioned feeling isolated. Victoria's expression shuddered slightly. Not really. My parents died when I was 23. Car accident. I was an only child, so... She shrugged, trying to make it seem casual, but Caleb could see the pain beneath. I have some distant cousins I see at holidays, but that's about it. I'm sorry, Caleb said, and meant it. He knew what it was like to be alone in the world, to not have that safety net of family. It was a long time ago. Victoria stared into her coffee. Sometimes I think that's why I stayed with my ex longer than I should have. He was awful, controlling and possessive, but at least he was someone. Being alone is, she trailed off. Terrifying, Caleb finished. Yeah, I know. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't just coffee anymore. It wasn't just pleasant conversation to pass the time. It was recognition. Two people who understood loneliness, who'd been shaped by loss, finding an unexpected kinship. Karen noticed, of course. She noticed everything. On the 8th morning, she slid into the booth next to Caleb when Victoria went to the restroom, her expression maternal and worried. You know who she is, right? Karen asked quietly. Caleb frowned. Victoria? Yeah, we've been talking for over a week now. No, I mean, do you know who she actually is? She works in business management or something. Caleb shrugged. Why? Karen studied his face, then seemed to come to a decision. Never mind. Just be careful, okay? You've been through enough. Before Caleb could ask what she meant, Victoria returned, and Karen disappeared back behind the counter. The interaction left Caleb unsettled, but he pushed it aside. Whatever Karen thought she knew, it didn't change the fact that Victoria had become the best part of his mornings. That afternoon, as Caleb was hauling lumber on the construction site, his coworker Derek sidled up next to him. Hey man, you got plans this Friday? Same plans I always have, Caleb grunted, adjusting his grip on the 2x4. Emma and I are having movie night. You need to get out more. When's the last time you did something just for you? I do plenty for me. Coffee with the mystery woman doesn't count. Derek grinned at Caleb's surprised expression. Come on, man. I saw you at the Cedar Street Café last Tuesday. You were so focused on her you walked right past me. We're just friends, Caleb said automatically. Sure. That's why you've been in a better mood all week. That's why Mike actually complimented your work yesterday. When's the last time that happened? Derek clapped him on the shoulder. Look, I'm not giving you grief. I'm happy for you. Just saying maybe it's okay to let someone in again. Sarah wouldn't want you to be alone forever. The mention of Sarah's name made Caleb's jaw tighten. You didn't know Sarah, and you don't know what she'd want. Fair enough. Derek held up his hands in surrender. But I know you're a good guy who deserves to be happy. Think about that. That evening, as Caleb helped Emma with her homework, fractions, which he barely understood himself, his daughter looked up at him with those too perceptive eyes. Daddy, are you happy? The question caught him completely off guard. What? Of course I am, Pumpkin. Why would you ask that? Because Mrs. Chen says you smile more now, and you've been humming in the mornings. Emma tilted her head, studying him. You used to be sad all the time, like after Mommy died. But now you seem different. Caleb's throat felt tight. He'd tried so hard to hide his grief from Emma, to be strong for her, but kids saw everything. I'm okay, Em. I promise. Is it because of the lady? His heart stopped. What lady? The one you have coffee with. Emma said it so matter-of-factly, like it was common knowledge. Mrs. Chen says you met someone nice. Is she your girlfriend? No, Caleb said firmly. She's just a friend. That's all. Oh. Emma looked disappointed. I thought maybe, I don't know, sometimes I wish you had someone, so you're not lonely when I'm at school. The simple honesty of it nearly broke him. Caleb pulled Emma into a hug, holding her tight. I'm not lonely, baby. I have you. You're all I need. But even as he said it, he wondered if it was true. Because the truth was, his mornings with Victoria had awakened something in him that he'd thought was dead. The desire for adult companionship, for someone to talk to who wasn't 8 years old or covered in construction dust. The desire to be seen as more than just Emma's dad or the quiet guy on the job site. The desire, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, to let someone matter again. Friday arrived cold and wet, the kind of November rain that made Seattle feel like the edge of the world. Caleb's truck started on the third try, a bad sign, and he made a mental note to ask Derek about checking the battery this weekend. He couldn't afford a mechanic, but Derek knew cars and would help for free. He was running late, nearly 8 o'clock by the time he pulled up to the cafe. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see Victoria sitting at their table, checking her phone with a worried expression. As he pushed through the door, she looked up, and relief flooded her face. I thought you weren't coming, she said as he approached, shaking water from his jacket. Truck wouldn't start, and Emma decided this morning that she hates all her clothes and nothing was acceptable for the school day. He slid into the seat across from her, exhausted already, and the day had barely begun. Why are 8-year-olds so dramatic? I think it's their job. Victoria smiled, pushing a coffee across to him. I ordered for you. Hope that's okay. You didn't have to do that. I know, but I wanted to. She paused, then added quietly, I like doing things for you, Caleb. It makes me feel useful, normal. There was something vulnerable in that admission, and Caleb found himself reaching across the table, his hand covering hers before he could think better of it. You are normal, Victoria. Whatever's going on in your life that makes you feel like you're wrong. She looked down at their hands, and for a moment Caleb thought he'd made a terrible mistake. But then her fingers curled around his, holding on like he was an anchor in rough water. I wish that were true, she said softly. They sat like that for several heartbeats, the cafe buzzing around them, rain hammering against the windows. Finally, Victoria pulled her hand back, but the warmth of her touch lingered on Caleb's skin. I have something to ask you, she said, and there was nervousness in her voice. You can absolutely say no, but I'd really like to meet Emma. Properly, not just hear stories about her. Caleb's protective instincts flared immediately. Emma was his whole world, and introducing her to someone new felt dangerous, like inviting chaos into their carefully maintained stability. But at the same time, Emma had asked about Victoria, and some part of him, the part that was starting to trust this woman across from him, wanted to share that part of his life with her. Why? He asked, not accusatory, just genuinely curious. Victoria considered the question carefully. Because she's important to you. Because I want to understand you better. And I can't do that without knowing the person who matters most in your life. And because... She hesitated. Because I haven't been around kids much. And the way you talk about Emma, she sounds amazing. I'd like to see that for myself. It was honest, and honesty was something Caleb valued above almost everything else. He took a sip of his coffee, thinking. Tomorrow's Saturday, he said finally. Emma and I usually go to the aquarium in the afternoon. It's free the first Saturday of the month, and she's obsessed with octopi right now. If you want to come, really? Victoria's face lit up like he'd offered her something precious. Really? But fair warning, she's going to ask you a million questions about marine biology, and she'll be devastated if you don't know the answers. I'll study tonight, Victoria promised, and she was smiling so wide that Caleb couldn't help but smile back. Meet us there at 2, front entrance. I'll be there. Caleb finished his coffee and stood to leave, but Victoria caught his arm. Thank you, Caleb, for trusting me with this. Don't make me regret it, he said, but his tone was gentle, teasing. I won't. I promise. As he drove to the construction site through the pouring rain, Caleb's mind was racing. What was he doing? He barely knew this woman. But at the same time, he felt like he knew her better than people he'd worked with for years. There was a connection between them, something real and solid that he couldn't quite explain. He just hoped he wasn't making a massive mistake. Saturday afternoon arrived clear and bright, one of those rare November days when the sun actually broke through Seattle's perpetual cloud cover. Caleb and Emma stood outside the Seattle Aquarium at 1:55, Emma bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. Is she really coming, Daddy? Are you sure? She said she'd be here, Pumpkin. What if she doesn't like me? Emma's voice went small, uncertain. What if I say something dumb and she thinks I'm weird? Caleb crouched down to Emma's level, putting his hands on her shoulders. First of all, you're not weird. You're smart and funny and amazing. Second, anyone who doesn't see that isn't worth knowing, okay? Okay, Emma whispered, but she didn't look convinced. At exactly 2 o'clock, Caleb spotted Victoria walking toward them, and his breath caught slightly. She'd dressed casually, jeans, sneakers, a green jacket that brought out her eyes. But there was something different about her today. She looked younger, lighter, like she'd left some heavy burden at home. Hi, she said, a little breathless. I'm sorry if I'm late. I wasn't sure about parking. You're right on time, Caleb assured her. Then, gently, Victoria, this is Emma. This is my friend Victoria. Emma stared up at Victoria with wide eyes, suddenly shy. Victoria crouched down, bringing herself to Emma's height, her expression open and kind. Hi, Emma. Your dad has told me so much about you. He says you're an expert on octopi. Octopuses, Emma corrected automatically, then clapped her hand over her mouth, mortified. Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. You're not being rude at all, Victoria said warmly. You're being accurate. That's much better. I looked it up last night, actually. Did you know that octopuses have 3 hearts? Emma's face transformed, shyness melting away in the face of her favorite subject. Yes, and blue blood. And they can change color to match their surroundings. And they're really smart. Some scientists think they might be smarter than dogs. That's incredible, Victoria said, and Caleb could tell she genuinely meant it. Will you show me your favorites inside? I'd love to learn more. Just like that, Emma took Victoria's hand, chattering excitedly as they walked toward the entrance. Caleb followed a step behind, watching in amazement as his daughter, who was usually so cautious around new people, opened up completely to this woman he'd known for barely 2 weeks. Inside the aquarium, Emma dragged them from exhibit to exhibit, pointing out fish and sea creatures with enthusiastic commentary. Victoria listened attentively, asking questions that made Emma think, engaging with her in a way that most adults didn't bother to do with kids. At the touch pool, Victoria tentatively reached in to pet a sea anemone, squealing with surprised delight when it moved under her fingers. Emma laughed, demonstrating the proper technique, and Caleb stood back, his heart doing something complicated in his chest as he watched them together. Your daughter is wonderful, Victoria said quietly, when Emma ran ahead to the jellyfish exhibit. She's so smart, Caleb, and kind. You should be incredibly proud. I am, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She's the best thing I've ever done. They moved through the exhibit slowly, and Caleb found himself relaxing, enjoying the simple pleasure of the afternoon. At one point, Emma asked if Victoria wanted to get ice cream with them afterward, and Victoria looked at Caleb, silently asking permission. If you have time, he said, and hoped he didn't sound too eager. I'd love to. They ended up at a small ice cream shop near Pike Place Market. Emma wedged between them in a booth, swinging her legs and working on a scoop of mint chocolate chip that was slowly melting down her hand. Victoria had gotten strawberry, and Caleb noticed she ate it slowly, savoring each bite like it was something special. Thank you for today, Victoria said, as Emma ran to look at the vintage candy jars near the counter. This has been one of the best afternoons I've had in, I can't even remember how long. Emma liked you, Caleb said. She doesn't usually warm up to people that fast. She's special. You both are. Victoria met his eyes across the table. I know we haven't known each other long, Caleb, but I want you to know that these mornings, today, it means everything to me. In my life, most relationships are transactional. People want things from me. But with you and Emma, it just feels real. Caleb wanted to ask what she meant by that, wanted to understand why someone like her, poised, educated, clearly from money based on the quality of her clothes, would find meaning in hanging out with a broke single dad and his kid. But before he could frame the question, Emma came running back with a vintage comic book she'd found. Daddy, can we get this? Please? It's only $5 and it's Wonder Woman and she's so cool. Caleb checked his wallet reflexively, doing the mental math. He had $23 to last until Monday. The comic would leave him $18, which should be enough for gas and maybe some groceries if he was careful. Please, Daddy? Victoria watched the calculation happening on his face, saw the moment he decided to say yes, even though it would make things harder. Before Caleb could speak, she stood up. Emma, how about this? I'll get the comic book for you, and you can tell me all about Wonder Woman. I don't know much about superheroes, and I bet you're an expert. Really? Emma's eyes went wide. Really? Consider it a thank you for being such an excellent tour guide today. Emma threw her arms around Victoria's waist, hugging her tight. Thank you. You're the best. Over Emma's head, Victoria met Caleb's eyes. He looked torn between gratitude and pride, wanting to argue but knowing it would upset Emma. Victoria gave him a small smile, understanding in her expression, and went to purchase the comic. When they finally left the ice cream shop, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emma clutched her comic book, chattering about the aquarium and ice cream and how Victoria was now officially her friend too. Caleb walked beside Victoria, their hands occasionally brushing, neither of them quite brave enough to close that final distance. Can Victoria come to movie night next Friday? Emma asked suddenly. Please, we're watching Finding Nemo, and she needs to see it if she wants to really understand fish. Caleb looked at Victoria, giving her an out. You don't have to. I'd love to, Victoria interrupted. If it's okay with you. Yeah, Caleb said, and his chest felt full. Almost too full. Yeah, it's okay with me. They parted ways at the parking garage, Emma hugging Victoria goodbye with promises to see her Friday. As Caleb watched Victoria walk away, Emma tugged on his hand. Daddy? I really like her. Is it okay if I like her? Caleb looked down at his daughter, at the hope and uncertainty in her eyes, and realized she was asking permission to care about someone other than her mom. The thought made his throat tight. Yeah, Pumpkin, he said softly. It's okay. I like her too. And as they drove home through the Seattle streets, Caleb allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. He was falling for Victoria Hale, falling hard and fast in a way that terrified him, in a way that felt inevitable and right and completely impossible all at once. He just hoped that when reality finally came crashing in, because it always did, they'd all survive the impact. Friday night arrived wrapped in the kind of anticipation that made Caleb's small apartment feel even smaller. He'd spent the afternoon cleaning, really cleaning, not just the usual quick sweep, pushing furniture around to make space, washing dishes that had been sitting in the sink, even attempting to fix the crack in the wall with some spackle he'd borrowed from Big Mike. Emma had been buzzing around him like an excited bee, asking every 5 minutes what time Victoria would arrive, whether they had enough popcorn, if her room looked okay in case Victoria wanted to see it. She's not inspecting the place, Em, Caleb said for the 10th time, but he understood the nervousness. He felt it too, that strange flutter in his chest every time he thought about Victoria stepping into his world, seeing how he actually lived rather than just meeting him in coffee shops and public spaces. The knock came at exactly 7 o'clock, and Emma practically launched herself at the door before Caleb could stop her. Victoria stood in the hallway, holding a bakery box and wearing jeans with a soft blue sweater that made her eyes look almost luminescent. She'd left her hair down and there was something different about her expression, lighter, freer, like she'd shed some invisible armor before coming here. Hi, she said, smiling at Emma's enthusiastic greeting. I brought cookies. I wasn't sure what kind you liked, so I got a variety. You didn't have to do that, Caleb said automatically, even as Emma was already pulling Victoria inside, chattering about the movie they were going to watch, and the blanket fort she'd helped build. I know, Victoria replied, meeting his eyes over Emma's head, but I wanted to. The apartment was small enough that Victoria could take it all in with a single glance. The worn couch with its duct-taped armrest, the small TV propped on a milk crate, the kitchen table that wobbled unless you propped up one leg with folded cardboard, the curtain dividing the bedroom into 2 spaces. Caleb watched her face carefully, waiting for judgment, for that subtle shift in expression that people made when they realized just how broke he was. But Victoria's expression never changed. She just smiled and let Emma drag her to the couch. They settled in to watch the movie, Emma wedged happily between them with a bowl of popcorn balanced on her knees. The cookies sat on the coffee table, already half demolished. Caleb had meant to pace them, make them last. But Emma's joy at having real bakery cookies, something they couldn't normally afford, had overridden his practicality. As the movie played, Caleb found himself watching Victoria more than the screen. She was completely engaged, laughing at the funny parts, making comments about the fish that delighted Emma. At one point during an emotional scene, he saw her wipe her eyes quickly, trying to hide tears. Something about that vulnerability, that willingness to feel things openly, made his chest ache. Halfway through the movie, Emma fell asleep, her head dropping onto Victoria's shoulder with the sudden weight of childhood exhaustion. Victoria looked down at her, then over at Caleb, her expression soft with something that looked almost like longing. She's out cold, Victoria whispered. She always crashes around 8:30 on Fridays, Caleb whispered back. Long week at school. He stood carefully, gathering Emma into his arms. She barely stirred, just mumbled something about dolphins and burrowed against his chest. He carried her to her side of the bedroom, tucking her in under the worn quilt Sarah's mother had made years ago. When he came back, Victoria had paused the movie and was looking around the apartment again, but this time with more attention to detail. Her eyes lingered on the photos stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. Emma, at various ages, Emma and Caleb at the beach, one faded photo of Sarah holding newborn Emma. That's her? Victoria asked quietly, nodding toward Sarah's picture. Yeah, that was taken in the hospital, right after Emma was born. Caleb sat down on the couch, suddenly exhausted. She was so happy that day. Terrified, but happy. Victoria moved to sit beside him, closer than before without Emma between them. You must miss her terribly. Every day, Caleb admitted. But it's different now. The grief isn't as sharp. It's more like... He struggled for the words. Like a scar instead of an open wound. It's always there, always part of me, but it doesn't bleed anymore. Until something tears it open again, Victoria said softly, and there was understanding in her voice that made Caleb look at her more closely. You've lost people, he said. It wasn't a question. My parents, like I told you, but also... She paused, seeming to weigh how much to share. I lost myself for a while. After they died, I threw myself into work, into building something, proving something. I was so focused on success, on achievement, that I forgot how to just be a person. How to have relationships that weren't about business or networking or strategic alliances. She laughed, but it was hollow. I'm 30 years old, and I can count my real friends on one hand, maybe one finger, if I'm being honest. That's lonely, Caleb said. It is. Victoria turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. That's why these past few weeks have meant so much to me. You and Emma. You see me as just Victoria, not as what I do or what I have or what I can offer, just me. Caleb felt something shift in the air between them, a charge like electricity before a storm. He should have asked what she meant by that, should have pushed for clarity about the parts of her life she kept vague. But in that moment, with her eyes locked on his and her face so close he could count the faint freckles across her nose, all coherent thought evaporated. Victoria, he said, his voice rough. Yes? I want to kiss you, but I need to know if that's okay. If this, whatever this is between us, is real for you too. Her answer was to close the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was tentative at first, questioning. But when Caleb's hand came up to cup her face, when he kissed her back with 3 years of loneliness and longing behind it, the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. They broke apart after a moment, both breathing hard. Victoria's hand was pressed against Caleb's chest, feeling his heart race under her palm. That was real enough for you? She asked, a small smile playing at her lips. Yeah, Caleb breathed. Yeah, that was pretty real. They spent the rest of the evening curled together on the couch, not watching the movie that played on, just talking quietly about everything and nothing. Victoria told him about her childhood, about the parents she'd lost, about the loneliness of being an only child in a big house with only nannies and tutors for company. Caleb shared more about his years in foster care, about the good homes and the bad ones, about learning to protect himself emotionally by never getting too attached. But you let me in, Victoria whispered. Why? I don't know, Caleb admitted. Maybe because you needed someone to see you, and I understand what that's like, needing to be seen. It was nearly 11 when Victoria reluctantly said she should go. Caleb walked her to the door, neither of them quite ready to say goodbye. In the hallway, under the flickering fluorescent light, Victoria took his hand. Can I take you and Emma somewhere next weekend, somewhere special? You don't have to. I want to, she interrupted. Please, Caleb, let me do this. He studied her face, seeing the earnestness there, the desire to give them something. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but nothing too expensive. I don't want Emma thinking that's normal. I promise, Victoria said, though there was something in her eyes that made Caleb wonder what her definition of not too expensive actually meant. They kissed again at the door, slower this time, sweeter. When Victoria finally left, Caleb stood in the hallway for a long moment, his lips still tingling, his heart feeling fuller than it had in years. He was falling in love with her. The realization should have terrified him, should have sent him running, but instead, it felt right. Like something that had been broken inside him was finally starting to heal. If only he'd known that in less than 48 hours, everything would come crashing down. Monday morning dawned gray and cold, typical Seattle November weather. Caleb arrived at the construction site already thinking about his coffee date with Victoria, already smiling at the memory of Friday night. Big Mike noticed immediately, slapping him on the back with a meaty hand. Well, well, look who's walking around like he won the lottery. Things going well with the mystery woman? Her name's Victoria, Caleb said, unable to keep the grin off his face. And yeah, things are good. Good for you, man. You deserve some happiness? Mike's expression turned more serious. Just be careful, all right? I know you're all in when you care about someone. Don't want to see you get hurt. I'll be careful, Caleb promised, though he wasn't sure it was a promise he could keep. He was already all in, already imagining a future that included Victoria in it. Derek approached as they were setting up for the day's work, his expression strange, excited but nervous, like he had news he wasn't sure how to share. Yo, Caleb, you see the magazine in the break room? What magazine? Fortune. There's this whole spread on Seattle business leaders. Pretty interesting stuff. Derek's tone was too casual, too forced. Since when do you read Fortune magazine, sir? Caleb asked, amused. Since my girlfriend left it here last week. Derek shifted his weight. You should check it out. During lunch, maybe. The conversation stuck with Caleb through the morning, nagging at him like a splinter under his skin. When lunch break finally came, he headed to the small break room where someone had indeed left a magazine on the coffee-stained table. Fortune, the cover proclaimed, with a subtitle about Seattle's business elite, the new guard. Caleb almost didn't open it. Business magazines had nothing to do with his life, with his world of hourly wages and maxed-out credit cards. But something made him flip through the pages, scanning headlines and photos of people in expensive suits standing in front of glass towers. And then he saw her. The photo took up a full page, Victoria, but not the Victoria he knew. This Victoria wore a tailored black suit that probably cost more than Caleb made in a month. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her makeup flawless, her expression cold and commanding. She stood in front of a modern office building, arms crossed, looking every inch the powerful executive. The headline read, Victoria Hale, the billionaire CEO who revolutionized tech investment. Caleb's hand started shaking as he read the article. Victoria Hale, 30 years old, CEO of Hale Industries, one of the largest venture capital firms in the Pacific Northwest. Net worth estimated at over $2 billion. Named to Forbes' 30 Under 30 list 5 years ago. Known for her ruthless business acumen and her intensely private personal life. There was a photo of her at some gala, wearing a dress that sparkled under chandeliers, standing next to politicians and celebrities. Another photo showed her giving a speech at a tech conference, commanding a stage in front of thousands. Caleb felt like he couldn't breathe. This wasn't the woman who'd sat on his worn couch eating popcorn with Emma. This wasn't the woman who'd shared a muffin with him because she knew he was counting dollars. This was someone else entirely. Someone who existed in a world so far removed from his own that they might as well have been living on different planets. You okay, man? Derek's voice cut through the fog. You look like you've seen a ghost. This is her, Caleb said, his voice hollow. This is Victoria. Wait, you're Victoria? Derek grabbed the magazine, scanning the article. Holy shit. Hayes, your girlfriend is a billionaire? She's not my girlfriend, Caleb said automatically, even though they'd kissed, even though he'd been planning a future with her. And she's not... She didn't tell me. Maybe she has a good reason? What good reason is there for lying about who you are? Caleb stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I told her everything about my life. About Sarah, about struggling to make rent, about counting dollars for Emma's school supplies. And the whole time she's sitting on billions? Maybe she wanted you to like her for herself, not for her money, Derek suggested, but even he sounded uncertain. Caleb felt humiliation burn through him like acid. All those times she'd bought him coffee, offered to share food, paid for Emma's comic book, she wasn't being kind, she was being patronizing. To her, his financial struggles must have been quaint, amusing even. The broke single dad with his endearing poverty, his small problems, his tiny life. And the worst part, the part that made his chest feel like it was caving in, was that he'd started to believe it was real, that she actually cared about him, about Emma, that somehow, impossibly, they could build something together? But how could they? She lived in a world of galas and boardrooms and billions. He lived in a world of overdue bills and construction sites and secondhand clothes. They were never going to work. The whole thing had been a fantasy, and he'd been stupid enough to believe in it. "I have to go," Caleb said, grabbing his jacket. "Hayes, your shift isn't over for another 4 hours. I don't care. Tell Mike I'm sick or something." Caleb was already halfway to the door. "I just need to get out of here." He drove aimlessly for a while, not ready to go home, not ready to face Emma's questions about why he was back early. His phone buzzed multiple times, probably Victoria, wondering why he hadn't shown up for their usual coffee, but he ignored it. He couldn't talk to her right now, couldn't hear whatever explanation or excuse she might offer. Finally, as the afternoon light started to fade, he ended up at Cary Park, looking out over the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in that forest of glass and steel was Victoria's office, her empire, her real life. And he'd been nothing but a temporary escape from it, a cute diversion from the pressure of being a billionaire CEO. His phone rang again. This time it was Mrs. Chen. "Mr. Hayes, Emma's school called. She's not feeling well and needs to be picked up. I tried to reach you earlier." "I'm on my way," Caleb interrupted, guilt washing over him. Here he was, wallowing in self-pity while his daughter needed him. "Tell them I'll be there in 20 minutes. He found Emma in the nurse's office, looking small and miserable with red-rimmed eyes. She perked up slightly when she saw him, but her smile was weak. "Hey, Pumpkin, Mrs. Chen said you weren't feeling good?" "My stomach hurts," Emma said quietly. "And I kept thinking about Mommy today. I don't know why." Caleb's heart broke a little. He gathered her into his arms, holding her close. "That's okay, baby. It's okay to miss her." As he carried Emma out to the truck, he made a decision. Whatever was happening with Victoria, whatever feelings he'd developed, they couldn't come before Emma's well-being, and Emma had gotten attached to Victoria too, had started to hope for something that could never be real. Better to end it now, before the damage went any deeper. That evening, after getting Emma settled with soup and cartoons, Caleb finally looked at his phone. 7 missed calls from Victoria, a dozen text messages, starting concerned and gradually shifting to worried. The last one, sent 20 minutes ago, simply said, "Please talk to me. Whatever happened, we can work through it." Caleb stared at those words for a long time. Then, his jaw set with grim determination, he typed out a response. "I know who you are. I saw the magazine. I think we need to take a break." The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared immediately, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, her response came through. "Let me explain, please. Can I come over?" "No, Emma's sick and I need to focus on her right now." "Then meet me tomorrow, please, Caleb. Don't shut me out without hearing my side." He wanted to refuse, wanted to cut this off cleanly, protect himself and Emma from the inevitable pain. But some part of him, the part that remembered her tears during the movie, her gentle hands on Emma's hair, the way she'd kissed him like he was precious, needed to understand. "Tomorrow morning, the café, but just to talk." "Thank you." Caleb set down his phone and went to check on Emma, who'd fallen asleep on the couch with her head on his Wonder Woman comic. He adjusted the blanket around her, brushed hair from her forehead, and tried to ignore the way his chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. He'd survived losing Sarah. He'd survived poverty and uncertainty and the weight of single parenthood. He'd survived everything life had thrown at him. He would survive losing Victoria too. He just wasn't sure he wanted to. Tuesday morning came too soon and not soon enough. Caleb dropped Emma at school. She was feeling better, though still quiet, and drove to the cafe with a sense of dread sitting heavy in his stomach. He arrived early, ordered his coffee with hands that trembled slightly, and sat at their usual table by the window. Victoria arrived exactly at 7:45, and the sight of her made Caleb's breath catch despite his anger, despite everything. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept, and she'd dressed simply in jeans and a sweater like she was trying to be the Victoria he'd thought he knew rather than the billionaire from the magazine. She slid into the seat across from him without ordering, her eyes searching his face. "Thank you for meeting me." "I almost didn't," Caleb said flatly. "I'm still not sure why I did." "Because you want to understand." Victoria's voice was quiet but steady. "And because despite what you think right now, what we have is real. It matters." "What we have?" Caleb let out a harsh laugh. "I don't even know what we have, Victoria. Or should I call you Ms. Hale? CEO Hale? What's the proper way to address a billionaire who's been slumming it with the working class?" Victoria flinched like he'd slapped her. That's not fair. Fair? Caleb leaned forward, keeping his voice low but intense. You want to talk about fair? I told you everything about my life. I showed you my crappy apartment, introduced you to my daughter, let you into the parts of my world that I don't share with anyone. And the whole time you were lying to me. I never lied. You let me believe you were just Victoria, just some woman with a stressful management job. Caleb's hands clenched around his coffee cup. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I was worried about impressing you with movie night in my apartment while you probably live in some penthouse that costs more than I'll make in my entire life. I don't care about any of that, Victoria said, her voice rising slightly. I don't care about the money, or the apartment, or any of it. I care about you, Caleb, about Emma, about what we've built together. We haven't built anything, Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Other patrons were starting to look over, but he didn't care. You built a fantasy. You came down from your ivory tower to play house with the poor single dad and his cute kid. Was it entertaining? Did it make you feel good about yourself? Stop it. Victoria stood too, her eyes bright with tears. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. Maybe you're not used to that in your world of corporate deals and power plays, but that's how it works down here in reality. Caleb grabbed his jacket. I can't do this, Victoria. We're from completely different worlds, and I was stupid to think otherwise. So that's it? Victoria's voice cracked. You're just going to walk away without giving me a chance to explain? What's to explain? You're a billionaire. I'm barely scraping by. You live in boardrooms, and I live paycheck to paycheck. There's no future here, and I'm not going to let Emma get more attached to something that's doomed to fail. It doesn't have to fail. Yes, it does! Caleb's voice was harsh, final. Because I can't be with someone who treats me like a charity case, who looks at my life and sees a problem to fix instead of just accepting me as I am. I never saw you that way, Victoria protested, reaching for his hand, but Caleb pulled back. Maybe not consciously, but that's what it was, wasn't it? Poor Caleb, struggling so hard. Let me buy him coffee, pay for his kids' toys, make myself feel generous and kind. He shook his head. I don't need a savior, Victoria. I need someone who sees me as an equal, and we both know that's impossible, given who you really are. Victoria was openly crying now, tears streaming down her face. You're wrong. You're so wrong. With you, I finally felt like myself again. Not the CEO, not the heiress, just Victoria. You made me remember what it's like to be human. For a moment, Caleb's resolve wavered. He saw the pain in her eyes, heard the rawness in her voice, and part of him wanted to believe her. Wanted to pull her into his arms and tell her they'd figure it out together. But then he thought about Emma asking if Victoria was going to be part of their lives. He thought about the inevitable moment when Victoria got bored of playing pretend and returned to her real world, leaving them behind. He thought about protecting his daughter from that kind of heartbreak, and his jaw hardened. I'm sorry, Victoria, but I can't do this. We're done. He walked out of the cafe without looking back, even though he could hear her calling his name, even though every step felt like he was leaving a piece of himself behind, even though he knew, with terrible certainty, that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. But sometimes the right choice and the safe choice were the same thing, and keeping Emma safe, keeping his heart safe, had to come first, even if it destroyed him in the process. The rain started that afternoon, a relentless downpour that turned Seattle's streets into rivers, and made the gray sky press down like a physical weight. Caleb sat in his truck outside Emma's school, engine running for heat, watching the windshield wipers struggle against the deluge. He was early, 40 minutes early, because going back to the empty apartment meant being alone with his thoughts, and his thoughts were dangerous territory right now. His phone sat on the passenger seat, screen dark. He turned off notifications after the first dozen messages from Victoria, unable to bear the constant reminder of what he'd walked away from. Derek had called twice. So had Karen from the cafe. Even Big Mike had sent a text. Whatever's going on, don't be an idiot about it. Too late for that, Caleb thought bitterly. He'd already been the biggest idiot in Seattle, letting himself believe that someone like Victoria Hale could actually want someone like him, that their connection had been real, rather than just another transaction in her world of endless resources and calculated moves. Except it hadn't felt like a transaction. That was the part that kept eating at him, the memory that wouldn't let him find peace in his decision. The way she'd looked at Emma with genuine wonder. The tears in her eyes during the movie, the vulnerability in her voice when she'd talked about being lonely, about forgetting how to be human. "Stop it," he muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make his knuckles white. "She lied. She let you believe something that wasn't true. That's all that matters." But was it a lie, really? She'd never claimed to be poor, never pretended to struggle financially. She'd just been vague about her work. And he'd filled in the blanks with his own assumptions. Maybe if he'd asked more questions, pushed harder for details about her life, he would have figured it out sooner. Maybe he hadn't wanted to know. Maybe some part of him had sensed that the truth would ruin everything, so he'd stayed willfully ignorant, content to exist in the fantasy they'd built together. The school bell rang, distant and muffled through the rain. Kids started pouring out of the building, a colorful chaos of backpacks and umbrellas and parents rushing to collect them. Caleb spotted Emma immediately. She was walking slowly, head down, no umbrella despite the downpour. He grabbed his jacket and climbed out of the truck, jogging toward her. "Emma! Pumpkin, what are you doing? You're getting soaked!" She looked up at him, and his heart stopped. Her face was blotchy and red, eyes swollen from crying. She'd been holding it together at school, putting on a brave face, but the moment she saw him, she crumbled. "Daddy," she sobbed, throwing herself into his arms. "Daddy, where's Victoria? Why won't she come back?" Caleb felt like someone had punched him in the chest. He'd been so focused on his own pain, his own sense of betrayal, that he hadn't fully considered what this would do to Emma. She'd lost her mother 3 years ago, and she'd just started to open her heart again, to let someone new in. And now that person was gone too, ripped away without explanation or goodbye. "Let's get you in the truck," he said, his voice rough. "We'll talk about it at home, okay?" Emma nodded against his chest, still crying. He carried her to the truck. She was getting too big for this, but she needed it right now, needed to be held and protected, and buckled her into the passenger seat. The drive home was silent except for Emma's occasional hiccuping sobs and the relentless drumming of rain on the roof. Inside the apartment, Caleb got Emma changed into dry clothes and wrapped her in a blanket on the couch. He made hot chocolate, the real kind with milk and cocoa powder and the last of their mini marshmallows, and sat down beside her, gathering her close. "Em, I need you to tell me what happened at school today." "Nothing happened," Emma said into his shoulder. "I just kept thinking about Victoria, about how she was supposed to come to my class next week for career day. I was going to introduce her to everyone and tell them about her job, and..." She trailed off, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Why did she leave us, Daddy? Did I do something wrong?" "No," Caleb said fiercely, tilting her face up to look at him. "You didn't do anything wrong, Pumpkin. None of this is your fault." "Then why? I thought she liked us. I thought she was going to stay." Caleb struggled for the right words, knowing that whatever he said would shape how Emma understood this loss, how she approached trust and relationships in the future. He couldn't let his own hurt make her cynical, couldn't let her grow up thinking people always left. "Victoria does like us," he said carefully. "She likes you very much. But sometimes grown-ups have complicated lives, and things don't work out the way we hope they will. It doesn't mean the feelings weren't real. It just means sometimes real isn't enough." "Because she's rich?" Emma asked, and Caleb's breath caught. "Olivia's mom showed me a picture on her phone. Victoria's really famous. She has billions of dollars and a big company." "How did Olivia's mom know about Victoria?" "I told Olivia about her, about the aquarium and movie night and how nice she was." Emma's voice got smaller. "Olivia's mom looked her up on her phone and showed me all these pictures. Victoria looks different in them. Scary, kind of. Not like our Victoria." Our Victoria. The words hit Caleb like a physical blow, because that was exactly the problem, wasn't it? The Victoria they'd known, the woman who'd sat on their couch eating popcorn and sharing cookies and looking at Emma like she was the most precious thing in the world, that Victoria was real. But she was also just one piece of a much larger, more complicated picture. "She's not scary," Caleb said, pulling Emma closer. She lives in a different world than we do. A world with a lot of money and a lot of responsibility. And I don't know if our worlds can fit together." "But they did fit," Emma protested. "She fit perfectly here, Daddy. She didn't care that our apartment is small or that we don't have a lot of money. She just liked being with us." "I know, baby, I know. Caleb pressed his face into Emma's hair, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, trying to hold himself together. But sometimes people surprise us. Sometimes they're not who we thought they were. But what if we're the ones who are wrong? Emma pulled back to look at him, her 8-year-old wisdom cutting straight to the heart of things. What if Victoria is exactly who we thought she was, and the money and the job are just things she has, not things she is? Caleb didn't have an answer for that. He just held his daughter and listened to the rain and tried not to think about Victoria crying in the cafe, about the desperation in her voice when she'd begged him to let her explain. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep clutching her Wonder Woman comic, Caleb lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling. His phone buzzed. Another message from Victoria, the first one in hours. Against his better judgment, he opened it. I know you don't want to hear from me. I know you think I lied to you, and maybe I did by omission. But please believe this. Everything I felt, everything we shared was real. You saw me, Caleb, the real me, not the CEO or the billionaire or the name in the magazine, just Victoria. And I've never been more myself than I was with you and Emma. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I let my fear of losing this ruin everything. I'll respect your decision to end things, but I need you to know you changed my life, both of you. And I'll carry that with me always. Caleb read the message 3 times, each word carving itself deeper into his chest. He wanted to be angry, wanted to hold on to his righteous indignation and wounded pride. But all he felt was tired and sad and utterly lost. He typed out a response and deleted it, typed another and deleted that too. Finally, he just set the phone down and closed his eyes, letting exhaustion pull him under. The next 2 days passed in a fog. Caleb went through the motions, work, picking up Emma, making dinner, helping with homework. But it all felt hollow, like he was watching his own life from a distance. Emma was quiet, subdued in a way that worried him. She'd bounce back eventually, kids were resilient, but right now she was grieving, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. Derek tried to talk to him on Wednesday, cornering him during lunch break. You look like hell, Hayes. Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear. I'm serious, man. When's the last time you slept? Ate a real meal? Derek sat down across from him, expression concerned. Look, I don't know the whole story about what went down with Victoria, but shutting down completely isn't the answer. I'm not shutting down. I'm just processing. You're punishing yourself, Derek corrected. And probably her too. But here's the thing. I looked her up after you left, read some articles about her. She's done a lot of good with her money, you know? Funds scholarships for foster kids, supports domestic violence shelters, donates millions to children's hospitals. That doesn't sound like someone who's just playing at being a good person. What's your point? My point is that maybe she's not the villain you're making her out to be. Maybe she's just a person who made a mistake. Derek leaned forward. We all have parts of our lives we don't share right away. You didn't tell us about Sarah until what, the 2nd or 3rd time you talked? Did that make you a liar? That's different. Is it though? Derek stood up, clapping Caleb on the shoulder. Just think about it, man. Don't throw away something good because of pride. But it wasn't just pride, Caleb wanted to say. It was self-preservation. It was knowing that people from different worlds couldn't make it work, no matter how much they might want to. It was protecting Emma from getting hurt worse than she already had been. Except Emma was already hurt. And so was he. And somewhere in Seattle, Victoria was probably hurting too. Thursday afternoon, as Caleb pulled up to Emma's school, he noticed a car he didn't recognize parked near the entrance. Black, expensive-looking, with tinted windows. His instincts went on alert immediately, some primal protective instinct firing. He parked quickly and got out, scanning the area for Emma. She was standing by the flagpole, and she wasn't alone. Victoria was there, crouched down to Emma's height, talking quietly while rain poured down on both of them. Neither of them had an umbrella, and Victoria's hair was plastered to her head, her clothes soaked through. Emma was crying again, and Victoria was holding her hands, saying something that Caleb couldn't hear from this distance. Anger flooded through him, hot and immediate and protective. Victoria had no right to be here, no right to talk to Emma without his permission, no right to keep inserting herself into their lives after he'd made it clear things were over. He stalked across the parking lot, his boots splashing through puddles. Emma, get away from her. Both of them turned to look at him. Emma's face crumpled. Daddy, no! Now, Emma. Caleb's voice was hard, harsher than he'd ever used with his daughter. Get in the truck. But Daddy, she just wanted to say goodbye. I said now. Emma flinched, then ran toward the truck, sobbing. Victoria stood slowly, and Caleb saw that she'd been crying too. Her mascara was running, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she'd lost weight in the past few days, looked fragile in a way that made something twist in his chest despite his anger. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. I know I shouldn't have come. Emma texted me yesterday from her friend's phone. She wanted to know why I hadn't come back. I couldn't just ignore that. So you thought you'd show up at her school? Do you have any idea how inappropriate that is? Caleb stepped closer, rain streaming down his face. You don't get to do this, Victoria. You don't get to waltz in and out of our lives whenever you feel like it. I wasn't waltzing anywhere, Victoria said, her voice gaining strength. I was saying goodbye to a little girl I care about, a little girl who deserves better than to be abandoned without explanation. You don't get to lecture me about what Emma deserves. No, you're going to listen to me for once, Victoria interrupted, and there was steel in her voice now, the commanding presence he'd seen in those magazine photos. I came here to tell Emma goodbye because she deserves that closure. Because, unlike you, I'm not going to just disappear from her life without a word. I wanted her to know that none of this was her fault, that I care about her, and that sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt everyone. This isn't about Emma. Of course it's about Emma. Victoria's voice rose, cracking with emotion. Everything is about Emma for you, and I understand that. I respect that. But you're so busy protecting her from potential hurt that you're not seeing the hurt you're actually causing. She's not an idiot, Caleb. She knows something happened between us, and your refusal to talk about it, to let me explain, is teaching her that people can't work through problems, that when things get hard, you just walk away. Don't you dare tell me how to raise my daughter. I'm not telling you how to raise her. I'm telling you that you're being a coward. Victoria took a step toward him, rain-soaked and trembling, but refusing to back down. You accused me of lying, but the truth is you never asked. You never wanted to know about my work or my life outside our coffee dates. You were happy to live in that bubble where I was just Victoria and you didn't have to deal with any complications. That's not— Yes, it is, she cut him off. And I let you do it because I wanted that bubble too. I wanted to be just Victoria, not the CEO or the heiress or the person everyone wants something from. I wanted to be someone who could eat popcorn with your daughter and kiss you on your couch and feel normal for once in my life. Her voice broke. I should have told you sooner, I know that. But I was terrified that the moment you knew the truth you'd see me differently, and I was right. You lied to me. I omitted things, Victoria corrected fiercely. There's a difference. And you want to know why? Because every relationship I've ever had has been poisoned by money. People either want it from me or they're intimidated by it or they see me as a problem to solve or a trophy to win. No one just sees me. Her eyes locked on his, bright with tears and rain. No one except you. Until you did. Caleb felt something crack in his chest, the armor he'd built around his heart starting to fracture. I don't know how to be with someone like you. Our worlds are too different. Our worlds? Victoria laughed, but it was hollow, painful. Caleb, I don't care about worlds. I care about you. I care about Emma. I care about the way you make me feel like I'm enough just as I am, not because of what I own or what I've built. I care about movie nights in your tiny apartment and sharing muffins at the cafe and watching your daughter's face light up when she talks about octopuses. It's not that simple. Why not? Victoria demanded. Why can't it be that simple? So I have money. So what? That doesn't change how I feel about you. It doesn't change the fact that you're the first person in years who's made me want to be better, to be more than just my job and my net worth. It doesn't change the fact that I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, stark and vulnerable and impossibly true. Caleb stared at her, this woman who looked so different from the polished CEO in the magazine, but so achingly familiar, and felt every defense he'd constructed start to crumble. You don't love me, he said, but his voice was weak. You don't even know me. I know you're stubborn and proud and terrified of being hurt again, Victoria said softly, stepping closer. I know you count every dollar and iron your shirt when you want to make a good impression, and you fall asleep on your couch most nights because you're too exhausted to make it to bed. I know you read Emma 2 chapters of whatever book she's into, even when you're dead on your feet. I know you put everyone else first and yourself last, and you haven't bought new boots, even though those ones are held together with duct tape. Caleb looked down at his feet automatically, at the boots he'd been meaning to replace for 6 months. When he looked back up, Victoria was right in front of him, close enough that he could see the individual raindrops on her eyelashes. I know you think you have to do everything alone, she whispered, that asking for help or accepting it makes you weak. I know you loved your wife and you're terrified of betraying her memory by moving on. I know you think you don't deserve happiness because Emma needs you to be strong, and being strong means sacrificing everything else. Her hand came up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. But I also know that you deserve more than just surviving, Caleb. You deserve to actually live, and I want to be part of that life, if you'll let me. I don't know how, Caleb admitted, his voice breaking. I don't know how to let you in without losing myself, without becoming dependent on something I can't keep. You won't lose yourself, and you can keep me if you want to. I'm not going anywhere. Victoria's other hand came up to cup his face, her thumb brushing across his cheek. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But running away from this, from us, because you're afraid it might hurt later, that's guaranteeing the hurt happens now. For you, for me, for Emma. Caleb closed his eyes, feeling the rain on his face, feeling Victoria's hands on him, feeling the weight of every fear and doubt he'd carried for so long. Behind him, he could hear Emma crying in the truck. In front of him, Victoria was offering everything he'd thought he couldn't have. I treated you terribly, he said, opening his eyes to meet hers. I said awful things. I walked away without listening. You were hurt and scared, Victoria said simply. And you were trying to protect Emma. I understand that. I'm still scared. Me too. She smiled, small and trembling, but real. But maybe we can be scared together. Before Caleb could respond, there was a small voice from behind them. Daddy? They both turned to see Emma standing in the rain, having climbed out of the truck. She was soaked and shivering, but her expression was determined. Emma, I told you to stay in the truck. I know, Emma interrupted, which almost never happened. But I had to say something. She looked between them, her small face serious beyond her years. Victoria didn't do anything wrong. She was nice to us. She made you smile again, and she made me feel like it was okay to care about someone who wasn't Mommy. Her voice wavered. I miss Mommy every day, but I don't think she'd want us to be sad forever. I think she'd want you to be happy, Daddy. And Victoria makes you happy. Caleb felt tears burning in his eyes, mixing with the rain. His 8-year-old daughter, who'd lost so much, was braver than he'd ever been. She was ready to take the risk, to open her heart despite knowing it could break again. He looked at Victoria, at the hope and fear and love warring in her expression. He thought about the past few weeks, the mornings that had felt like coming home, the way she'd fit into their lives like she'd always been meant to be there. He thought about Derek's words, about not throwing away something good because of pride. And he thought about Emma, who deserved to see her father choose courage over fear. I'm sorry, he said to Victoria, his voice rough with emotion. I'm so sorry for everything I said, for not letting you explain, for being too scared to see what was right in front of me. Does this mean, Victoria started, hardly daring to hope. Caleb cut her off by pulling her into his arms, kissing her the way he'd wanted to since the moment he'd walked away in the cafe. She kissed him back desperately, her hands fisting in his soaked jacket, both of them crying and laughing and shaking with relief. When they finally broke apart, Emma had attached herself to both of them, her small arms trying to wrap around their legs. Victoria crouched down, pulling Emma into a proper hug. I'm sorry I scared you, Victoria whispered into Emma's hair. I'm sorry I made you think I was leaving. You're not leaving? Emma asked, pulling back to look at her. You're staying with us? Victoria looked up at Caleb, the question in her eyes. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. I'm staying, Victoria promised Emma. If you'll have me, both of you. Yes, Emma said immediately. Then, with the practicality of childhood, can we get out of the rain now? I'm really cold. They all laughed, the tension breaking. Caleb gathered Emma into his arms while Victoria stood, all three of them drenched and shivering but happier than any of them had been in days. As they walked toward Caleb's truck, Emma between them holding both their hands, Caleb caught Victoria's eye over his daughter's head. She smiled at him, radiant despite the rain and ruined makeup and expensive clothes that were probably destroyed. And in that moment, Caleb understood something fundamental. Their worlds weren't as different as he'd thought. Because at the core of it all, they wanted the same things: connection, honesty, love that didn't demand anything except the courage to show up and be present. The rain continued to pour down, washing away the past few days of pain and misunderstanding, leaving something cleaner and stronger in its wake. It wasn't a perfect resolution. They still had things to work through, conversations to have about how to navigate the vast differences in their circumstances. But they would have those conversations together, with honesty and patience and the kind of trust that came from choosing each other even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. They ended up back at Caleb's apartment, all three of them dripping water on the worn linoleum as they stumbled through the door. Emma immediately ran to get towels while Caleb and Victoria stood in the small entryway, suddenly awkward now that the intensity of the rain-soaked confrontation had faded into something quieter, more uncertain. "I should have brought a change of clothes," Victoria said, looking down at her ruined designer blouse with a rueful smile. "This is completely destroyed." "I think I have an old sweatshirt that might fit you," Caleb offered. "It's not fancy, but it's dry." "Fancy is overrated," Victoria said softly, meeting his eyes. "I've learned that recently." Emma returned with an armful of towels, distributing them with the solemn efficiency of a nurse. "Victoria, you can wear my unicorn pajamas if you want. They're too small for me now, but they'd probably fit you." Despite everything, Victoria laughed, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very generous." 20 minutes later, they were all changed into dry clothes. Victoria in Caleb's old Seahawks sweatshirt that hung nearly to her knees, Emma in her favorite rainbow pajamas even though it was barely 5 in the afternoon, and Caleb in jeans and a t-shirt. The expensive clothes Victoria had worn were hanging over the shower rod, probably beyond saving, but she didn't seem to care. They gathered on the couch, Emma wedged between them again, like she was afraid they might disappear if she wasn't touching both of them. For a long moment, nobody spoke, the weight of everything that had happened settling over them like a blanket. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "We need to talk. Really talk. About everything." "I know," Caleb said. "I owe you that. I owe you more than that." "You don't owe me anything," Victoria corrected gently. "But we need to understand each other if this is going to work. No more assumptions, no more avoiding the hard conversations." Emma looked up at them, her expression worried. "Are you going to fight again?" "No, pumpkin," Caleb assured her, running his hand over her damp curls. "We're just going to be honest with each other. Sometimes that's uncomfortable, but it's necessary." "Can I stay and listen?" Emma asked. "Or is it grown-up stuff?" Caleb and Victoria exchanged a look. Finally, Victoria said, "You can stay. You're part of this too, and you're smart enough to understand what we're talking about. But if it gets boring or you want to go play, that's okay too." Emma nodded seriously, settling back against the couch cushions. Caleb took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I need to explain why I reacted the way I did," he started. "When I saw that magazine, saw who you really were, it brought up every insecurity I've ever had. Growing up in foster care, I was always the kid who didn't belong, who didn't have enough, who wasn't good enough. And even after Sarah and I got together, even after Emma was born, I still felt like I was one disaster away from losing everything." He looked down at his hands. "When I found out you were a billionaire, all those old feelings came rushing back. I convinced myself that you couldn't possibly want someone like me for real, that I was just some project or charity case." "You were never that," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "Never. I know that now. Or at least, I'm trying to believe it." Caleb met her eyes. "But I need you to understand that this is hard for me. Not the money itself, but what it represents. The distance between our worlds, the fact that you could give Emma and me anything we need without even thinking about it while I'm over here counting dollars for gas money." "So let's talk about the money," Victoria said, shifting to face him more directly. "Because you're right. It is an elephant in the room, and we can't just ignore it." She took a breath. "I'm worth about $2.3 billion, Most of that is tied up in investments and the company, but yes, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. My apartment is a penthouse in downtown Seattle. I have a house in the San Juan Islands and another in Aspen. I employ over 200 people directly and influence thousands more through the companies we fund. Emma's eyes had gone wide. That's a lot of money. It is, Victoria agreed. And here's the thing. I didn't really earn most of it. Not in the way your dad earns his paycheck every week. My parents were wealthy. They left me their company and their fortune when they died. I've grown it, yes, and I work hard. But I started from a position of incredible privilege. She looked at Caleb. I know that creates an imbalance between us. I know that no matter what I say, you're going to worry that I see you as less than equal because I have resources you don't. Don't you, though? Caleb asked quietly. Even a little bit? When you look at my apartment, my truck, the way I have to budget every expense, doesn't part of you think it would be easier if you could just fix it all? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Honestly? Yes. Part of me wants to throw money at every problem you have because I can, and because it would make me feel useful. But I've learned that's not love, that's control. That's me trying to remake your life in a way that makes me comfortable instead of respecting the life you've built for yourself and Emma. So what do we do? Caleb asked. How do we navigate this? We set boundaries, Victoria said firmly. We have honest conversations about money and what feels okay and what doesn't. We don't let me just steamroll over your autonomy because I have a bank account with more zeros. She reached over Emma to take Caleb's hand. But we also have to be practical. I can't pretend I'm not wealthy, and you can't pretend it doesn't affect things. We need to find a middle ground. Like what? Emma piped up, following the conversation with the intensity of someone trying to understand a complicated puzzle. Victoria smiled at her. Like, if we go somewhere together and I want to treat everyone to something nice, your dad shouldn't have to feel bad about accepting that. But also, I shouldn't assume I can just buy whatever I want for you guys without asking first. It's about respect and communication. That makes sense, Emma said thoughtfully. Like how Daddy lets Mrs. Chen pay for ice cream sometimes because it makes her happy, but he also does nice things for her, like fixing her sink. Exactly like that, Victoria said, impressed. It's about balance and mutual respect. Caleb felt some of the tension in his chest ease. I can work with that, but I need you to promise me something. If I say no to something, if I tell you I need to do something myself or I'm not comfortable with you paying for something, you have to respect that, even if it doesn't make logical sense to you. I promise, Victoria said solemnly. And I need you to promise me something too, that you won't let pride make you or Emma suffer unnecessarily. If there's something you genuinely need and I can help, you'll at least consider letting me. Caleb nodded slowly. I can try. It won't be easy for me, but I can try. That's all I ask. Victoria squeezed his hand. Now, there's something else we need to talk about. My work schedule is intense. I travel frequently, I have meetings that run late, I'm often dealing with crises at odd hours. I can't promise I'll always be available when you need me, and I can't promise that my work won't sometimes come first. I understand that, Caleb said. I work construction. I know what it's like to have an unpredictable schedule, to be exhausted at the end of the day. And I would never ask you to give up your career. That's part of who you are. But it's going to be hard sometimes, Victoria warned, especially with Emma. Kids need consistency, and I might not always be able to provide that. Then we'll figure it out as we go, Caleb said. We'll communicate, we'll adjust, we'll make it work, because that's what people do when they care about each other. Emma yawned suddenly, the emotional exhaustion of the day catching up with her. Can we have dinner now? I'm really hungry. The tension broke completely, both adults laughing. Yeah, pumpkin, Caleb said, standing up. Let me see what I can put together. Actually, Victoria said, pulling out her phone, can I order us some food? I know a great Thai place that delivers. My treat, and before you argue, I dragged you both out into the rain and made you have heavy emotional conversations. The least I can do is feed you. Caleb started to protest automatically, then caught himself. This was exactly what they'd just talked about, learning to accept things gracefully. Okay, thank you. But Emma and I like our food really mild. We're not good with spice. Noted, Victoria said with a smile, already pulling up the restaurant's menu. While they waited for the food, Something shifted in the apartment's atmosphere. The awkwardness faded, replaced by something that felt almost like normalcy. Emma showed Victoria her latest drawings while Caleb tidied up the kitchen. When the food arrived, far more than 3 people could reasonably eat, but Victoria had wanted to make sure they had options. They spread it out on the coffee table and ate picnic style, Emma chattering about school while the adults exchanged soft glances over her head. After dinner, Emma asked if they could watch a movie, and nobody had the heart to say no. They settled back onto the couch with The Little Mermaid playing, Emma falling asleep halfway through despite her insistence that she wasn't tired. Caleb carried her to bed, tucking her in with practiced ease. When he returned to the living room, Victoria was looking at the photos on his refrigerator again, her expression wistful. "She looks like her," Victoria said, nodding to the picture of Sarah. "Emma, she has her smile." "Yeah," Caleb said, coming to stand beside her. "She does." He paused, then added, "I need you to know, Sarah will always be part of my life, part of Emma's life. I loved her, and I'll never stop loving her, even though she's gone." "I would never ask you to," Victoria said softly. "Love isn't a finite resource, Caleb. Loving her doesn't mean you can't love someone else too. And honestly, the fact that you're capable of loving that deeply, that loyally, it's one of the things I admire most about you." "You're not worried? That you'll always be compared to her, that you'll never quite measure up?" Victoria turned to face him fully. "Sarah was Emma's mother and your wife. I could never replace her, and I don't want to. I just want to be part of your lives going forward, to build something new that honors what came before but isn't trapped by it." She reached up to cup his face. "I'm not competing with a ghost, Caleb. I'm just trying to love the man standing in front of me." Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I'm terrified, and I don't know how this is all going to work, but I love you." "I love you too," Victoria whispered back, "and we'll figure it out, together." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, until Victoria pulled back with a sigh. "I should probably go. It's late, and you have work tomorrow." "Or," Caleb said, surprising himself with his own boldness, "you could stay. On the couch, I mean. It's not comfortable, but it's late, and you're still in my sweatshirt, and your clothes are wet, and—" He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Victoria smiled, soft and warm. "I'd like that." Caleb found her a blanket and a pillow that had seen better days, apologizing for the state of both. Victoria just laughed and settled onto the couch like it was the finest bed in a 5-star hotel. As Caleb headed toward his makeshift bedroom, she called out softly, "Caleb?" He turned back. "Yeah. Thank you. For giving us another chance. For being brave enough to try. Thank you for not giving up on me when I was being an idiot." "Well," Victoria said with a grin, "someone has to keep you humble." Caleb smiled and went to bed, falling asleep faster than he had in days, knowing that Victoria was just in the other room, that Emma was safe and happy. That somehow, impossibly, they were going to make this work. The next few weeks were an adjustment for everyone. Victoria couldn't change her work schedule overnight, but she made an effort to be present when she could. She started joining them for breakfast at the cafe on the mornings when she didn't have early meetings. She came to Emma's school play, sitting proudly in the audience next to Caleb despite the curious looks from other parents who recognized her from business magazines. She learned to navigate Caleb's fierce independence, offering help in ways that didn't bruise his pride, accepting his refusals with grace when he needed to do things himself. Caleb, for his part, worked on accepting that Victoria's presence in their lives didn't diminish what he'd built. When his truck finally died completely and Victoria offered to help him get a reliable used car, not buy him a new one, just help with the down payment, he swallowed his pride and accepted. When Emma needed new winter clothes and Victoria took her shopping, he let them go without insisting on paying for everything himself. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when Caleb felt overwhelmed by the gap between their lifestyles, times when Victoria's work pulled her away for days at a time, and Emma cried because she missed her. There were awkward encounters with Victoria's business associates who couldn't understand why she was dating a construction worker, and equally awkward moments when Caleb's coworkers made jokes about him being a kept man. But they talked through it all. Every misunderstanding, every hurt feeling, every moment of doubt, they brought it into the light and dealt with it together. 3 months after their reconciliation in the rain, Victoria showed up at the apartment on a Saturday morning with an unusual request. "I want to show you something," she said. "Both of you. Will you come with me?" "Where are we going?" Emma asked, already pulling on her shoes with the enthusiasm of someone who'd learned that Victoria's surprises were usually good ones. "It's a secret," Victoria said, her eyes twinkling, "but I promise you'll like it." They drove across the city in Victoria's car. She'd stopped hiring drivers when she was with them, preferring the intimacy of the three of them together, until they reached a neighborhood Caleb didn't recognize. Older buildings, tree-lined streets, a mix of residential and commercial spaces that gave it a village-like feel. Victoria pulled up in front of what looked like an old cafe, the windows dark, a for-lease sign hanging in the door. "What is this?" Caleb asked as they got out of the car. "Come inside," Victoria said, producing a key. The interior was dusty and clearly hadn't been used in a while, but Caleb could see the bones of something beautiful. Exposed brick walls, hardwood floors that would be gorgeous once refinished, large windows that let in streams of morning light. There was an old counter along one wall, room for tables and chairs, a kitchen in the back that would need updating but had good bones. "I don't understand," Caleb said, looking around. "Why are we here?" Victoria took a deep breath and Caleb could see she was nervous. "I bought this building 3 weeks ago. It used to be a cafe, but the owners retired and couldn't find anyone to take it over." She turned to face him. "I want to reopen it, not as a vanity project or an investment property, but as a real community space. Somewhere people can gather, where they feel welcome, where a cup of coffee doesn't cost $7, and you don't need a trust fund to afford breakfast." "That's a nice idea," Caleb said carefully, still not understanding why she'd brought them here. "I want you to run it," Victoria said in a rush. "You and me together. I'll handle the business side, the finances, the logistics. But I want you to be the face of it, to manage the day-to-day operations. You're so good with people, Caleb. You notice things. You care about the regulars. You understand what it's like to need a space that feels like home." Caleb stared at her, his mind racing. "Victoria, I don't know anything about running a cafe. I work construction." "You could learn," Victoria said, "and you wouldn't have to do it alone. We'd hire staff, get training, do this right. But I've been watching you at the Cedar Street Cafe for months now. You belong in a place like this. And more than that, you deserve work that fulfills you, not just work that pays the bills." "I can't just quit my job." "Why not?" Victoria challenged gently. "The construction work is killing your back. You're exhausted all the time, and you've told me yourself it's not what you wanted to do with your life. This could be different. You'd have regular hours, you'd be home for Emma every night, and you'd be building something that matters. With your money," Caleb said, the old defensiveness creeping in. "With our partnership," Victoria corrected. "Yes, I'm providing the capital, but you'd be providing the vision, the labor, the heart. We'd be equal partners in this, Caleb. I'm not trying to rescue you or fix you. I'm trying to build something with you." Emma, who'd been exploring the space, came running back. "Daddy, there's a whole room in the back that could be a reading corner, with books and comfy chairs. Can we do that?" Caleb looked at his daughter's excited face, at Victoria's hopeful expression, at the space around them that held so much potential. He thought about the construction site, about the physical toll it took, about coming home too tired to do more than heat up dinner and help with homework. He thought about the teaching degree he'd abandoned, about the dream of doing something meaningful with his life. And he thought about what Emma had said in the rain. "Sometimes we're the ones who are wrong." "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "It's a big decision, and I can't make it on the spot." "Of course," Victoria said immediately. "Take all the time you need. There's no pressure, I promise. If you decide it's not for you, we'll figure out something else. This building isn't going anywhere." But over the next week, Caleb found himself thinking about the cafe constantly. He started researching, reading about small business management, looking at menus and operational models. He talked to Karen at the Cedar Street Cafe about what made a place feel welcoming, what kept customers coming back. And slowly, carefully, he let himself imagine a different future. One where he woke up excited about work instead of dreading it. Where he could be present for Emma's school events without having to beg off from a construction site. Where he and Victoria could build something together that served their community and reflected their values. 2 weeks after Victoria showed him the building, Caleb called a family meeting. Emma sat at the kitchen table looking solemn and important, while Caleb and Victoria stood on either side. "I've made a decision about the cafe," Caleb said, "and it affects all of us, so I wanted us to talk about it together." "Are we opening it?" Emma asked, bouncing slightly in her chair. "We are," Caleb said, and felt Victoria's hand find his under the table, squeezing tight. "But I need to set some ground rules. This is a partnership, 50-50, even if Victoria is putting in all the money to start. We make decisions together, and if either of us feels like the balance is off, we talk about it immediately." "Agreed," Victoria said. "And we do it right," Caleb continued. "No cutting corners, no rushing. We take the time to train properly, to hire good people, to build something that will last." "Absolutely. And one more thing, we create jobs that pay a living wage. Whatever profit this place makes, we reinvest it in our employees and our community. This isn't about getting rich. It's about creating a space that matters." Victoria's eyes were bright with tears. "I couldn't agree more." Emma clapped her hands. "Can I help? I could draw pictures for the walls or recommend books for the reading corner." "You can definitely help," Caleb said, pulling her into a hug. "This is a family project." Over the next 6 months, they transformed the empty building into something beautiful. Caleb gave notice at the construction site. Big Mike was sad to see him go, but understood. Even gave him some free advice about dealing with contractors and renovations. They hired a small team of staff members, all people who needed a chance just like Caleb had. They installed the reading corner Emma had envisioned, filled with donated books and comfortable chairs where kids could curl up while their parents had coffee. They named it simply the Corner Café, a nod to the place where they'd first met, where their story had really begun. The grand opening was a modest affair. No ribbon cutting or press release, just an invitation to the neighborhood to come see what they'd built. Karen from the Cedar Street Cafe came, hugging Caleb tight and whispering that she was proud of him. Derek and Big Mike showed up, embarrassing Caleb with their enthusiasm. Mrs. Chen brought friends from her building, delighted to see her favorite family thriving. But the moment that mattered most came near the end of that first day. The cafe was full of people laughing and talking, the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filling the air. Emma was in the reading corner with 3 other kids, showing them her favorite books. Victoria was behind the counter helping customers, looking more relaxed and happy than Caleb had ever seen her in any boardroom photo. And Caleb stood in the middle of it all, looking around at what they'd created together, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: pride. Not the defensive, brittle pride that came from refusing help, but the quiet satisfaction of building something meaningful, of taking a chance and having it pay off. Victoria caught his eye across the room and smiled, that radiant smile that had first made him fall in love with her. He smiled back, and in that moment, the story of their journey felt complete. From that first morning when he'd stepped in to help a stranger, to the painful revelation and reconciliation in the rain, to this, a new beginning built on honesty and trust and love that had been tested and proven true. That evening, after the cafe closed and Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, in what had become her corner of the space, Caleb and Victoria stood outside watching the city lights reflect off the rain-slicked streets. "It was a good day," Victoria said softly, leaning against him. "The best," Caleb agreed. "Thank you for believing in this. In us, for being patient with me while I figured out how to let you in." "Thank you for giving me a chance to be more than just my net worth," Victoria replied. "For seeing me when everyone else just sees what I have." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Victoria said, "I've been thinking about something. The penthouse downtown, I barely live there anymore. Most nights I'm here or at your apartment, and it's just this big empty space that doesn't feel like home." "Where does this feel like home?" Caleb asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Wherever you and Emma are," Victoria said simply. "Your cramped apartment with the wobbly table and the leaky faucet feels more like home than any mansion ever has." Caleb turned to face her fully. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I want us to find a place together," Victoria said. "Nothing ostentatious, just a normal house with enough room for all of us. Somewhere Emma can have her own real bedroom, where we can have a yard for her to play in. Somewhere that's ours, not mine or yours, but ours." "That's a big step," Caleb said, but his heart was already racing with possibility. "I know, and if it's too soon, we can wait. But Caleb, I'm all in on this, on us. I don't want to keep splitting my life between different spaces. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to be there for Emma's school projects and movie nights and all the little moments that make up a life. Caleb kissed her softly, tasting coffee and hope on her lips. Okay. Okay? Let's find a house. Our house. Nothing too fancy. I'm still going to have a heart attack if you try to buy us a mansion, but somewhere that feels right for all of us. Victoria threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. We're really doing this. Building a life together. Yeah, Caleb said, holding her close. We really are. 6 months later, they moved into a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and a backyard just big enough for Emma's dreams of a garden. It wasn't palatial, but it was theirs, filled with a mix of Victoria's beautiful furniture and Caleb's worn, comfortable pieces, decorated with Emma's artwork and family photos that included all of them now. The cafe thrived, becoming exactly what they'd envisioned, a gathering place where everybody knew your name, where coffee was affordable and kindness was free, where the community came together over shared tables and honest conversations. Victoria scaled back her hours at Hale Industries, promoting someone she trusted to handle day-to-day operations while she focused on strategic decisions and spent more time at the cafe, more time with Caleb and Emma. On their first anniversary, measured from that rainy afternoon outside Emma's school, where everything had changed, Caleb came downstairs to find Victoria and Emma in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes and making a spectacular mess of it. Emma's hair was dusted with flour, and Victoria had syrup on her nose, and they were both laughing so hard they could barely stand. "What are you two disasters doing?" Caleb asked, leaning against the doorframe with a smile. "Making you anniversary breakfast," Emma announced proudly, "except we're not very good at it." "We're terrible at it," Victoria corrected, gesturing at the lumpy batter and the smoke detector that had already gone off twice. "But we're trying." Caleb crossed the kitchen and pulled them both into a hug, not caring about the flour or the syrup or the burnt pancake smell. "It's perfect," he said. You're both perfect." Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed clutching a new book Victoria had gotten her, Caleb and Victoria sat on the back porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The rain had stopped for once, leaving the air clean and fresh. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked quietly. "Choosing this life instead of the one you had before? The galas and the boardrooms and all of it?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering. "You know what I regret? All the years I spent thinking that success meant money and power and prestige. All the time I wasted trying to be someone I thought I should be instead of just being myself." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the last light of sunset. "This life, with you and Emma, in this house, running that cafe, this is the most successful I've ever been. Because I'm finally happy. I'm finally real." "I used to think I wasn't good enough for you," Caleb admitted. "That you'd eventually realize you'd settled for less than you deserved." "You want to know what I think now?" Victoria asked, taking his hand. "I think I'm the one who got lucky. I think I'm the one who found something precious when I wasn't even looking for it. You saw me, Caleb, really saw me, and you loved me anyway." "That was never in question," Caleb said softly. "From the moment you sat down at my table in that cafe, even when I was trying to push you away, I was already falling. I just had to learn to trust it." They sat together as the night deepened around them, the house behind them warm with light and life, and the promise of all the mornings to come. Inside, Emma slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams an 8-year-old dreams when she knows she's loved and safe. In the quiet streets of Seattle, the cafe they'd built together stood ready to welcome another day of community and connection. And on that porch, two people who'd both been lonely in their own ways held each other close and understood what they'd found. Not a fairy tale ending where problems disappeared and life became perfect, but something better and more real. A partnership built on honesty, a love tested by fire and proven true, and a home that had nothing to do with money or status and everything to do with the simple, profound act of choosing each other every single day. Caleb had learned that accepting help wasn't weakness, that love didn't diminish when shared, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone in. Victoria had learned that wealth without connection was poverty of the worst kind, that being seen mattered more than being admired, and that home wasn't a place you bought, but something you built with the people you loved. And Emma, wise beyond her years, had learned that hearts were big enough to hold multiple loves, that families could be built in unexpected ways, and that sometimes the best things in life started with a simple act of kindness between strangers in a coffee shop on a cold Seattle morning. The story that had begun with Caleb defending a woman he didn't know had become the story of three people finding each other against all odds, building a life that honored the past while embracing the future, and proving that love, real, messy, complicated, beautiful love, could bridge any divide if you had the courage to meet each other halfway. As the first stars appeared in the Seattle sky, Caleb pulled Victoria closer and whispered the truth that had taken him so long to accept. "You're my home now, you and Emma, not this house, or the cafe, or anything else. Just you." "And you're mine," Victoria whispered back. "You saw me before you knew my name, and that changed everything." In the end, it wasn't wealth that had saved them, or status, or any of the things the world said mattered. It was something much simpler and infinitely more valuable: the willingness to be vulnerable, to forgive, to choose love, even when fear made it easier to walk away. That choice, made over and over again in 1,000 small moments, had turned strangers into family, isolation into belonging, and a chance encounter into a lifetime of shared mornings, quiet understandings, and the kind of love that doesn't make headlines but changes everything for the people lucky enough to find it. And as the night settled around them, full of possibility and peace, they knew that this ordinary, extraordinary life they'd built together was worth more than all the billions in the world. This was home. This was love. This was enough. And it always would be.